The video playback filled my monitor, a greatest hits montage of my own manufactured bravery. There I was, Jake Carter, the one and only host of Ghost Tripper, bathed in the green glow of a night vision camera inside the abandoned Pennhurst Asylum. Okay, so either that was the ghost of a constipated nurse, I said to the camera, my voice dripping with the practiced sarcasm that paid my rent, or this building just has terrible plumbing. A jump cut showed me in the supposed Amityville horror house, snoring theatrically in a sleeping bag. Woke up 3 times, my voiceover explained, twice to pee, once because of a car alarm. Truly the devil's work. My brand was simple. I was the guy who went to haunted places and didn't find ghosts. I found faulty wiring, drafts, and local kids trying to spook people. My subscribers ate it up. My channel was my life. A constant gnawing hunger for views, for engagement, for the next adrenaline spike that came from a rising subscriber count. I swiveled in my leather gaming chair, the skyline of Boise, Idaho, a grid of indifferent lights outside my loft window. I clicked Go Live. The chat window exploded. "All right, Ghost Trippers," I began, leaning into my professional-grade microphone, a grin plastered on my face. "You've seen me debunk the Bell Witch, laugh in the face of the Mothman, and use an Ouija board as a coaster. But the algorithm gods demand a sacrifice, and I've found the perfect altar." I dragged a file onto the screen. It was a scanned newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. The headline, in stark black letters, read, "Tragedy at the Silver Fang. 47 miners perish in catastrophic collapse." I let the image hang there for a moment. This, my friends, is from 1923, Black Creek, Montana, a booming silver town that went bust in the most spectacular way possible. I switched to another image, a more recent but equally grim article from a regional paper. "The town that died in a winter." According to the official story, I continued, my voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. After the mine collapsed, the town was hit by the worst blizzard in a century. They say the survivors just walked away, left everything. By spring, Black Creek was a ghost town. Then, for the final hook, I shared a screenshot from a local folklore forum. The text was amateurish, full of typos, but the content was gold. It spoke of old crow legends, stories of a place where the earth itself was hungry, where a spirit of the deep woods would awaken when the silver veins were disturbed. It claimed the miners didn't die in a collapse. They were taken. "So, what do you say?" I asked my faceless audience. "A town that died overnight? A cursed mine? A hungry earth spirit? Sounds like a job for Ghost Tripper." The chat scrolled faster than I could read. The hype was real. The bait was taken. 2 days later, the city lights of Boise were a memory in my rearview mirror. My Ford F-150 devoured the miles. The V8 engine a low rumble against the sheer emptiness of the American West. The flat plains of southern Idaho slowly buckled and rose, becoming the rolling foothills of Montana. Those, in turn, gave way to dense pine forests that clawed at the sky, crowding the narrow asphalt road. The sun beat down on the cab and the air conditioner fought a losing battle. My radio, which had been spitting out classic rock, devolved into a hiss of static that felt as vast and empty as the landscape. I pulled over to record a segment. "Day 2 on the road to nowhere," I said into my phone's camera, panning across a vista of jagged peaks and shadowed valleys. "The cell signal died about 50 miles back. I haven't seen another car in over an hour. There's a certain kind of loneliness out here that's impressive. It makes you feel small. makes you wonder what could be hiding in all that emptiness. I paused, then added with a wink, probably just bears. Or, a multi-level marketing scheme targeting Sasquatches. Stay tuned. I found the turnoff for Black Creek just as the sun began to dip below the mountains, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The road was unpaved, a gravel track that rattled my teeth. And then, I was there. The silence was the first thing that hit me. Not quiet. Silence. A profound, absolute lack of sound that felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. The town was a collection of skeletal remains. Wooden buildings, their spines broken, slumped against each other for support. A saloon stood on the main street, its swinging doors long gone, its windows vacant eyes staring into nothing. The rusted husks of mining carts lay overturned beside the path, being slowly consumed by weeds. The air was crisp and thin, the clean scent of pine and cold stone undercut by something else, a faint, almost subliminal odor of decay and damp earth, like a freshly dug grave. I killed the engine, its silence making the stillness even deeper. I grabbed my drone from the passenger seat. Time for the establishing shot. The little machine whirred to life, a jarring insect noise in the dead air, and ascended. On my controller screen, the layout of the town became clear. It wasn't built in a valley. It was carved into the side of one, a scar of human ambition on an otherwise untouched canvas of wilderness. As I panned the camera over the dilapidated streets and rooftops, I noticed it. Something was profoundly wrong. There were no birds flitting between the buildings, no squirrels scrambling up the pines, no chipmunks darting across the dirt road. The town was sterile, lifeless. My primary target was visible at the far end of the street, where the town crashed into the base of the mountain, the entrance to the Silver Fang mine. I landed the drone and walked toward it, my boots crunching a lonely rhythm on the gravel. The entrance was a dark maw partially collapsed. A wall of rock and ancient timbers blocked most of the opening. A faded metal sign peppered with rust holes was nailed to a thick post. Black Creek Mine. Private property. No trespassing. The massive wooden support beams framing what was left of the entrance were covered in deep parallel gouges. They were splintered and torn, the wood within the grooves pale against the weathered gray exterior. My first thought was a bear, but these marks were too uniform, too deep. It looked like something had been trying to claw its way out, not in. Something with claws bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. As twilight bled the color from the world, I decided against camping in the town itself. The vibes were all wrong. I drove the truck back about a quarter mile, parking it on a bluff that overlooked Black Creek. It was a perfect vantage point for some time-lapse shots. I set up my gear, positioning one camera on the town and another facing into the dark woods behind me. The temperature was dropping fast. Darkness fell like a lead blanket. The stars were brilliant, unobscured by city lights, but they offered no comfort. They were just cold, distant sparks in an infinite blackness. It was then that the sound came. It started low, a mournful note rising from the depths of the forest. It wasn't the yipping howl of a coyote or the deep, resonant call of a wolf. This was different. It was guttural, thick with a pain and rage that vibrated through the floor of my truck. The sound clawed at something primal inside me, a deep-seated instinct to run and hide. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed my camera, my hand shaking slightly as I turned it on myself, forcing the familiar cynical mask into place. "Well, folks," I said, my voice a little too tight. Sounds like the local welcoming committee is warming up their vocal cords. Let's hope they're not asking for a sacrifice. The howl came again, closer this time, and it sounded less like an animal and more like a scream trying to tear its way out of a human throat. My logical mind, the one that built a career on skepticism, scrambled for an explanation. A cougar's scream could be mistaken for a woman's. A bear, enraged or injured, could make ungodly noises. I clung to these rationalizations like a drowning man to a splintered plank. "It's just a mountain lion," I muttered to the empty cab of my F-150, the words tasting like a lie. The sound had been too deep, too resonant. It felt less like it had traveled through the air and more like it had vibrated up from the ground itself. I pushed the fear down. Fear was bad for business. I was Jake Carter, the unflappable debunker. I swung out of the truck, the cold night air a slap to the face. I built a fire, bigger than I needed, the flames greedily eating the dry pine I'd gathered. The crackle and pop of the wood was a welcome noise, a small rebellion against the oppressive silence of the woods. I busied myself with my gear, a familiar ritual to calm my fraying nerves. I positioned my 3 night vision trail cameras in a wide perimeter around my makeshift camp, their little red infrared lights blinking like watchful eyes in the dark. One faced the trail leading back to Black Creek, one faced the bluff, and the third pointed directly into the black wall of trees from where the howl had come. I settled into my camp chair, a mug of lukewarm coffee in my hands, and started recording a log for the channel. "Okay, night 1 in the allegedly haunted territory of Black Creek," I said, forcing a casual tone. "The fire is going, the cameras are rolling. So far, the only spirit I've encountered is the spirit of abject boredom. Our mysterious howler has gone quiet. Probably found a date for the evening." As I spoke, a flicker of movement on the monitor connected to my camera feed caught my eye. It was the camera aimed at the woods. A shape, dark and indistinct, had blurred across the edge of the frame. It was there and gone in a fraction of a second. I rewound the footage, playing it back frame by frame. It was useless, just a smear of motion against the static, monochrome background. "Probably a deer," I said aloud, trying to convince myself. But a deer wouldn't move that fast. Then the glitches started. The monitor for my primary camera, the one filming me, began to fizz with static. The battery indicator, which had been at 90%, suddenly flashed red before the screen went black. I checked my phone. The fully charged power bank connected to it was dead. "What the hell?" I grumbled. "Must be the cold. Or some kind of magnetic ore in the mountain screwing with the electronics." Another rationalization, another flimsy shield against the encroaching dread. The attack was not a creeping horror. It was a symphony of violence, instant and absolute. One moment I was staring into the fire, the next the world exploded. A sound like a freight train tearing through canvas ripped the night apart as something colossal slammed into my campsite. It wasn't a charge. It was a detonation of motion from the tree line. My heavy-duty tent, which I'd set up but hadn't gotten into, was obliterated. Not knocked over, but shredded and thrown a dozen feet as if hit by a car. My camp chair was kicked out from under me, and I hit the ground hard. The air driven from my lungs. I rolled, scrambling backward on my hands and feet, my brain failing to process what I was seeing. It was a nightmare given form, silhouetted against the firelight. It stood on 2 legs, but it was no man. It was nearly 7 feet tall, a horrifying fusion of man and beast with a powerful, stooped posture. Its body was a mass of thick muscle and coarse, dark fur. Long arms ended in what looked like claws, and its head was canine, but wrong. The snout too short, the jaw too powerful. 2 points of light burned in the center of the mass, reflecting the fire. Yellow, predatory eyes filled with a terrifying intelligence. It took a step toward me, and a low growl rumbled from its chest, a sound that vibrated in my bones. My survival instinct finally kicked in, overriding the paralysis of terror. My hunting knife was on my belt. My flare gun was in the side pocket of my backpack, which had been thrown near the fire. I lunged for the pack, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. The creature was impossibly fast. It crossed the 10 feet between us in a single bound. I felt a searing, white-hot agony in my left shoulder as it swiped at me. The claws, thick and curved like sickles, tore through my jacket, my thermal shirt, and the flesh beneath as if it were all wet paper. The force of the blow spun me around and threw me to the ground. Pain eclipsed everything. A roaring filled my ears. I could feel the wet warmth of blood soaking my sleeve. Through a haze of shock, I saw it standing over me, its head lowered, jaws wide. I could smell its breath, a foul stench of raw meat and damp earth. This was it. This was how I died. Not debunking a ghost, but torn apart by something that shouldn't exist. My hand, acting on its own, finally closed around the hard plastic of the flare gun. With a guttural scream born of pure terror and agony, I jammed the barrel upwards toward its face and pulled the trigger. The world erupted in brilliant, searing magnesium light. The flare shot past the creature's head, but the blinding flash, happening inches from its eyes, had its effect. It shrieked, a high, piercing sound of pain and fury that was completely unlike its earlier growl, and recoiled, pawing at its face. That was my chance. Ignoring the fire in my shoulder, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran for the one solid metal thing in this godforsaken wilderness, my truck. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and fumbled for the keys in the ignition. My left arm was useless, a dead weight sending waves of nausea through me. The engine roared to life just as the creature, its vision apparently recovering, turned and charged again. I slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires screamed on the gravel, catching just as the beast reached the truck. A heavy thud rocked the vehicle as it slammed its body against the driver's side door, leaving a massive dent. I saw the yellow eyes again, burning with hatred in my side mirror before the F-150 shot forward, leaving the monster and my ruined campsite behind. I drove like a madman, fishtailing down the gravel road, my one good hand strangling the steering wheel. I didn't slow down until the asphalt was under my tires, and the sign for Black Creek was miles behind me. An hour down the highway, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a chilling cold and a violent shaking I couldn't control. The pain in my shoulder was a living thing, a hot, pulsating coal buried in my body. I pulled into the first sign of civilization I saw, a dilapidated roadside motel called the Pine View, whose flickering neon sign suggested a much better view of pines than it actually offered. I stumbled into the room, leaving a trail of blood on the worn carpet. In the bathroom, under the buzz of a fluorescent light, I peeled away the layers of shredded fabric. The wound was horrific. 4 deep, parallel gashes torn to the bone, surrounded by a mess of mangled tissue. Using a bottle of cheap whiskey from the truck's emergency kit, I poured the alcohol over the wound, crying out as the fire intensified. Then I collapsed onto the stained bedspread, falling into a feverish, nightmarish sleep. I dreamt of running on 4 legs through a dark forest, the taste of hot blood in my mouth, and the silver watchful eye of a full moon pulling me onward. I woke to the jarring sound of a maid's cart rattling down the exterior corridor. Sunlight, thick with dust motes, streamed through a gap in the cheap curtains. My first conscious thought was of the pain. I braced myself, expecting the searing agony from the night before, but there was nothing. Just a dull, heavy ache, like I'd overdone it at the gym. The fever was gone. The violent shivering had ceased. I felt strangely clear-headed, strangely strong. I sat up, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. Cautiously, I reached for my left shoulder. The shredded fabric of my shirt was stiff with dried blood. I peeled it away from my skin, expecting to see the raw, mangled wound from the night before. What I saw made the air freeze in my lungs. It wasn't possible. The wound was still there, but it wasn't a wound anymore. The 4 deep gouges that should have required dozens of stitches, if not reconstructive surgery, had closed. The flesh had knitted itself back together, leaving behind an ugly, raised scar of purplish-red tissue, already looking weeks old rather than mere hours. It was a miracle of healing that defied every law of biology I knew. I touched the scar tissue. It was warm and felt like it was humming with a low-level energy. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my newfound clarity. I stumbled out of bed and into the harsh morning light of the parking lot. The world seemed different, hypersensitive. The colors were too bright, the edges of everything too sharp. The sun felt less like a gentle warmth and more like a physical weight on my skin. I could hear the low hum of the motel's ice machine from 50 yards away. I could hear the faint whisper of a conversation from inside the room next to mine. I could smell the stale coffee from the dispenser in the lobby and the grease from the diner across the highway, each scent distinct and overwhelming. My senses were on fire, dialed up to a level that felt both exhilarating and nauseating. A new sensation clawed its way up from my stomach. Hunger. Not the normal everyday need for food. This was a ravenous, gnawing emptiness, a primal craving that bordered on pain. I walked across the asphalt to the diner, a place called the Greasy Spoon, and slid into a cracked vinyl booth. A waitress with a tired face and a name tag that read Brenda came over.
"What can I get for you, hun?" she asked, popping her gum. "A steak," I said, my voice hoarse. "The biggest one you have. And a glass of water. The T-bone's 20 ounces. How you want it cooked?" "Rare," I said. "Just show it the flame and bring it to me."
She gave me a strange look but shuffled off toward the kitchen. When the steak arrived, sizzling on a platter, something inside me broke. All pretense of civility vanished. I grabbed the knife and fork but quickly discarded them, picking up the massive piece of meat with my hands. I tore into it like a starving animal, ripping away chunks of barely seared flesh, the metallic taste of blood flooding my senses. It wasn't enough. The hunger was a black hole inside me, and this was just a pebble tossed into the void. I devoured the entire 20-ounce steak in less than 5 minutes, leaving nothing but a clean bone. Brenda just stared, her mouth slightly agape. I threw a $50 bill on the table and walked out, the gnawing hunger still unsatisfied. Back in the motel room, I fell into the rabbit hole of the internet, my fingers flying across the laptop keyboard. My search history became a map of my dawning horror. Rapid tissue regeneration in humans, symptoms of advanced rabies infection, effects of hallucinogens found in Montana wildlife. Nothing fit. My rational mind was failing, grasping at straws while a deeper, more instinctive part of me knew the truth. Subconsciously, my fingers typed new search terms: Wendigo folklore, Skinwalker Legends, Montana. Cryptozoology forums. I landed on a page filled with grainy photos and wild, rambling accounts of giant wolf-like creatures. Lycanthropy. The word screamed in my mind. I slammed the laptop shut with a clatter, a wave of revulsion and terror washing over me. This was insane. I was a professional debunker. I dealt in facts, in evidence. This was the stuff of fantasy, of B-grade horror movies. And yet, there was the scar, the heightened senses, the inhuman hunger, and something else. A new feeling that was starting to build inside me like a tide. A pull. An inexplicable, undeniable urge to go back. Back to Black Creek. It wasn't a desire. It was a physical need, a homing instinct I couldn't articulate. My body, my very blood, was telling me to return to the place that had nearly killed me. It wanted to go home. I fought it. For hours, I paced the small motel room, arguing with myself, trying to force myself to pack my remaining gear and drive east, back to Boise, back to civilization and sanity. But the pull grew stronger with every passing minute, a magnetic force tugging at my soul. Finally, defeated, I went into the grimy bathroom to splash water on my face. I stared at my reflection in the cheap pitted mirror. Jake Carter, the ghost tripper, stared back. But something was wrong. As I watched, for just a heartbeat, my reflection shifted. My brown eyes, tired and scared, flared with an intense, luminous gold. It was the same shade as the eyes that had stared at me from the darkness. A predator's eyes. They stared back at me from my own face, full of a wild, alien hunger. That was the moment the denial shattered. That was the moment I truly understood that I was infected, tainted by the creature from the woods. I wasn't just Jake Carter anymore. I was something else. I walked out of the motel room without a backward glance. The sun was getting low in the sky, and a brilliant, almost full moon was already a pale ghost in the afternoon haze. I got into my truck, the dent in the driver's side door a stark reminder of my ordeal. I didn't drive east. My hands, acting with a will of their own, turned the steering wheel west, back toward the mountains, back toward Black Creek. I was no longer in control. The Chushaya Krav inside me was. The drive back to Black Creek was a fever dream. The setting sun painted the mountains in bruised purples and bloody oranges. The closer I got, the more the pull intensified, becoming a physical ache deep in my bones. It wasn't my mind making the decisions anymore. It was an instinct, ancient and undeniable, guiding me back to my place of violent rebirth. I parked the F-150 in the exact same spot on the bluff overlooking the dead town. Just as the last sliver of sun vanished in the full moon, a perfect, luminous silver dollar cleared the highest peak. And then the agony began. It started as a tremor in my hands, then spread like fire through my veins. My muscles coiled into knots, twisting and spasming beyond my control. I fell out of the truck, landing hard on the cold ground, a scream tearing from my throat, a sound that was half human, half beast. It felt like every bone in my body was breaking at once. I heard a series of sickening, wet cracks as my skeleton began to reconfigure itself. My spine elongated, forcing me onto all fours. My shoulders broadened with a sound of tearing cartilage. My skull felt like it was being crushed and reshaped in a vice, my jaw stretching forward, my teeth lengthening into fangs that sliced my own lips. This was no Hollywood special effect. This was a biological nightmare, a bloody, excruciating deconstruction and reconstruction of my own form. Black fur sprouted from my skin, pushing through my pores in a wave of itching, burning pain. My senses exploded again, 1,000 times more intense than before. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of smells, the pine needles on the ground, the scent of a rabbit a half-mile away, the cold stone of the mountains. My human consciousness, my identity as Jake Carter, was being shoved into a small, dark corner of my own mind, a terrified passenger in a body that was no longer mine. The animal was taking over. Rage, pure and undiluted, washed away thought, washed away fear. And beneath the rage was a singular driving instinct: hunt. I was no longer a man. I was a weapon of tooth and claw, running on 4 powerful legs. The world was a blur of motion as I plunged into the forest, my new body moving with a grace and speed that felt both alien and perfectly natural. I was faster than any human, stronger than any wolf. The hunger I'd felt in the diner was a pale shadow of the ravenous void that now consumed me. My first kill was a buck, startled from its hiding place. There was no chase, no struggle. I was on it in a heartbeat, a shadow of explosive force. I remember the feeling of its warm neck in my jaws, the snap of bone, the hot, coppery spray of blood. There was no horror, no disgust. There was only the primal satisfaction of a successful hunt, the silencing of the gnawing hunger. I was tearing into my kill, lost in the bloody business of survival, when a low growl from the darkness interrupted me. I looked up, my muzzle dripping with blood. I was not alone. They emerged from the shadows like ghosts surrounding me. 3 of them. They were like me, but different. Leaner, wilder, their fur matted and scarred. Their bodies were coiled springs of tension, and their intelligent eyes glowed with the same feral gold as my own. They circled me slowly, a silent, menacing pack. They were judging me, the newcomer, the stranger who had trespassed on their territory. Then, a 4th figure appeared, and the others immediately fell back, lowering their heads in submission. This one was different. He was massive, larger than any of the others, larger even than the creature that had attacked me. His fur was a patchwork of dark gray and silver, and his body was a road map of old scars. One of his ears was torn. He moved with the slow, deliberate confidence of absolute authority. This was the Alpha. He approached me not with aggression, but with a weary, appraising curiosity. He sniffed the air, then sniffed the deer I had killed. His gaze met mine, and in those ancient golden eyes, I saw not just savagery, but a deep, sorrowful intelligence. He seemed to be weighing me, measuring my worth. My new instinct screamed at me, submit or fight. The human part of me, the small, terrified voice of Jake, was screaming to run. But the beast that wore my skin was proud. I lowered my head slightly, but I did not cower. I let out a low growl of my own, a statement of my presence. The Alpha's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. He didn't bite. He didn't claw. He simply struck me with one massive forepaw, a blow so powerful it felt like being hit by a sledgehammer. The world spun, and I crashed to the forest floor, the wind knocked out of me. He placed one heavy paw on my chest, pinning me to the ground, and leaned down, his hot breath on my face. A deep rumbling growl echoed in his chest, a clear and unmistakable message: I am the Alpha. You are nothing. He held me there for a long moment before releasing the pressure and stepping back. The challenge was over. My place had been established. I awoke with the first rays of dawn painting the forest floor. The transformation back was less violent, but just as disorienting, leaving me naked, shivering, and covered in dirt and the dried blood of my kill. My human mind reasserted itself, and the memories of the night came flooding back. The hunt, the kill, the submission. I retched, vomiting bile onto the pine needles. It gets easier. The voice was soft, female. I looked up. A woman was standing a few feet away, leaning against a tree. She had dark braided hair and a calm face, but her eyes were watchful, wary. The same golden eyes I had seen in the Werewolves the night before. She was one of them. In her hands, she held a bundle of old worn clothes, flannel shirt, canvas pants. She tossed them to me. "My name is Maya," she said, her voice even. "Arthur wants to see you." Arthur. The name resonated with the memory of the giant, silver-furred alpha. I pulled on the clothes, my body aching, my mind a chaotic storm of horror and disbelief. Maya watched me without a word, her expression unreadable. I had survived the night. I had survived my first moon. But I had a sinking feeling that my trials were just beginning. I had been found by the pack. Maya led me not into the ruins of Black Creek, but away from them, down a narrow, overgrown deer trail that wound into a hidden ravine. The air here was cooler, shielded from the sun. Tucked away against a sheer rock face were a half-dozen old mining barracks, weathered but still standing, far more intact than anything in the main town. They were connected by a series of well-worn paths and, as I would soon learn, a network of shallow tunnels that offered quick, hidden passage between them. This was their home, their sanctuary. The inside of the main barrack was Spartan and primitive. The air smelled of wood smoke, tanned leather, and unwashed bodies. Animal hides covered the floor and were draped over crude, handmade furniture. It was a place built for survival, not comfort. Several other people, the pack, were inside, moving with a quiet purposefulness. They stopped what they were doing and watched me, their golden eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. I was an outsider, an anomaly. At the far end of the long room, sitting in a heavy wooden chair that looked like a throne, was the Alpha. In his human form, he was not the monster I had expected. Arthur was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with a sinewy build that spoke of a life of hard labor. His face was a landscape of deep lines. His gray hair was tied back, and his faded blue eyes held the same ancient weariness as his wolf form. His arms were covered in the faded blue ink tattoos of a miner, a pickaxe, a canary, a pinup girl. He gestured to a stool in front of him. I sat. The room was silent except for the crackling of the fire in the stone hearth. "You were bitten?" Arthur said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "By the old one, the hermit." I just nodded, my throat too dry to speak. "Thought he died years ago," Arthur mused, more to himself than to me. "He was one of the first. Went mad from the isolation. Saw everyone as a threat to his territory. He finally looked me in the eye. That bite makes you one of us now. The blood is in you. There's no going back. This is your life." He told me their story, a history passed down through generations. They were the descendants of the original miners of the Silver Fang. Not all of them, but a handful who had been deep in a newly blasted tunnel when they broke through into something else. An ancient cavern, a place the Crow legends had warned their ancestors to avoid. Something was in that cavern, Arthur said. A presence. A spirit of the hungry earth. It didn't kill them. It changed them. When the first full moon rose after the breach, the first werewolves of Black Creek were born. The official story of the mine collapse and the blizzard was a lie, a cover story crafted by the few unturned miners who fled in terror. But the curse wasn't just this. Arthur said, holding up his hands, scarred from both man's work and beasts. When we broke that seal, we let something else out too. Something that had been sleeping in the deep places. He leaned forward, his eyes dark. We call them the rot hooves. They crawled up from the depths of the mine weeks after the change. They are the reason this town is dead, the reason we hide in this ravine. They are the true curse of Black Creek. He described them in a low, grim voice. Blind, subterranean creatures that hunted by sound, with bodies of twisted muscle and bone, and the bleached skulls of deer for heads. They were relentless, numerous, and their claws carried a poison that rotted the flesh. As I listened, I looked around at the faces in the room. I saw the truth of Arthur's words in their eyes. The pack was not a fearsome legion of monsters. They were a dwindling tribe of survivors, trapped in a generational war they were slowly losing. I saw teenagers who had never known a world outside this ravine, whose only reality was hiding, hunting, and fighting. They were on the edge of extinction, and they knew it. Not everyone welcomed me with weary acceptance. A man pushed his way to the front, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He was younger than Arthur, with a thick neck and a permanent scowl. His aura screamed aggression. "So we just accept this outsider?" he snarled, jabbing a thumb in my direction. "This city boy who came here with his toys and cameras? He's weak. He still smells of the world that forgot us." "That's enough, Owen," Arthur said, his voice quiet but firm. Owen shot me a look of pure contempt before storming away. "Owen believes only in tooth and claw," Maya said quietly, having moved to stand near me. "He thinks Arthur is too cautious. He thinks the only way to survive is to attack, to kill them all. To prove my worth, or perhaps just to get me out of his sight, Arthur gave me my first task. You need to learn our ways if you're to survive, he said. Maya will take you on the hunt. You will provide for the pack, or you will be a useless mouth to feed. The next morning, Maya and I moved through the forest. She was silent, efficient, moving with a supernatural stealth that I, in my clumsy human form, could not hope to match. She was tracking an elk, following signs I couldn't even see. But the chase was long, leading us for miles across the rugged terrain. The elk was clever, always staying one step ahead. That's when my old life, the one I thought was dead and gone, offered a lifeline. I saw the way the land was shaped, the way a narrow pass cut between two steep, rocky hills. I remembered studying topographical maps for my trips, planning routes, understanding the flow of the land. Wait, I said, stopping Maya with a hand on her arm. She looked at me, annoyed. Chasing it is pointless. It knows this land better than we do. But if you can push it just for a half mile to the south, I can get ahead of it and cut it off at that pass. She looked from me to the landscape. Her golden eyes narrowed in thought. It was a risk. Splitting up was dangerous, but she saw the logic in it. She gave a curt nod. While she harried the elk from behind, I took a shortcut, scrambling up a rockfall, using every bit of my human ingenuity and knowledge of terrain to beat our prey to the choke point. I hid myself among a cluster of boulders, my heart pounding, the hunting instinct from the night before stirring within me. Minutes later, I heard the crash of undergrowth. The elk burst into the pass, its sides heaving, its eyes wide with panic. It was a perfect trap. When we returned to the barracks that evening, dragging our kill, the pack looked at me differently. Maya, in a quiet voice, told Arthur what had happened. How my human mind, not my wolf's strength, had secured the meal. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than suspicion in her eyes. It might have been respect. Owen just sneered from the shadows, unimpressed. But I had proven I was not entirely useless. I had brought a human trick to a wolf's world, and for the first time since I'd woken up in that cheap motel, I felt a sliver of something that wasn't terror. It was a glimmer of hope. The success of the hunt bought me a fragile acceptance. For the next week, I was part of the hunting parties, learning the ways of the pack. I learned to read the forest not with my eyes, but with my nose and ears. I learned which trails were safe and which territories to avoid, but a shadow hung over our temporary prosperity. On every patrol, we found more signs that the rot hooves were pushing outward from the mine, encroaching on the pack's hunting grounds. We'd find patches of forest floor trampled into a muddy pulp, the clawed tracks of deer and elk mixed with other stranger prints, cloven but dragging, as if the creatures were lame. The remains of their kills were easy to spot. Animal carcasses torn apart with a savage, wasteful violence, left to putrefy. And always, there was the smell. A cloyingly sweet, gag-inducing stench of decay that clung to the air and turned the stomach. We were a party of 5, Arthur leading myself, Maya, Owen, and a young, eager wolf named Caleb, scouting a ridge north of the ravine. The air was thick with the foul scent. "They've never come this far up the mountain," Caleb whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "They're getting bolder," Owen growled, his hand resting on the hilt of a large hunting knife strapped to his thigh. "Or hungrier." We found the source of the smell over the next rise. A massive grizzly bear lay dead in a small clearing. Its body was a horror show. It hadn't just been killed, it had been savaged, its thick hide ripped open in a dozen places. But the wounds weren't clean. The flesh around them was blackened and necrotic as if poisoned. "This is wrong," Arthur said, his voice a low growl. "A bear this size. It would take a whole pack of us to bring it down." As he spoke, the forest fell silent. The chirping of birds, the buzzing of insects, it all just stopped. The silence was a prelude. They emerged without a sound, stepping from behind trees and clawing their way up from the soft earth of the forest floor. The rot hooves. They were even more hideous than Arthur's description had prepared me for. They stood on 2 digitigrade legs that ended in cloven, decaying hooves. Their bodies were gaunt, wrapped in tight gray skin that looked like dried leather, but they moved with a jerky, unnatural speed. Their arms were too long, ending in hands with bony, talon-like fingers. But their heads were the true nightmare. They had no faces. Where a face should be, there was only a bleached, empty deer skull, its vacant eye sockets staring into nothing. They were blind, but the skulls tilted and swiveled, tracking our every move. A soft, wet clicking sound emanated from their throats, a grotesque form of echolocation. There was no time for a plan. They were on us. The fight was chaos. I transformed, the pain of the change a familiar fire. The world sharpened, smells and sounds becoming a dizzying torrent of information. The pack became a whirlwind of fur and claws, 4 wolves against a dozen lurching abominations. They were strong, but their movements were erratic, puppet-like. They swiped wildly, their bony claws whistling through the air. The key was their blindness. They reacted to sound. A snapped twig, a growl, the thud of a body hitting the ground. Each noise drew a flurry of attacks. Owen fought with pure suicidal rage, a dark blur of motion that left 2 rot hooves twitching on the ground with their skulls shattered. Maya was more fluid, a phantom that dodged and weaved, her attacks precise and deadly. but there were too many of them. Caleb went down with a yelp of pain, a deep gash in his leg. Arthur fought like the lion he was, a silver-furred behemoth protecting his pride. He threw one of the creatures against a tree with enough force to shatter bone, but I could see him tiring. The years of fighting, the weight of leadership were taking their toll. As he turned to defend the injured Caleb, another rothhoof lunged from his blind spot. It drove a bony spur, an unnatural growth from its forearm deep into Arthur's side. The alpha roared in pain, a sound that cut through the din of battle. He staggered back, shaking the creature off him, but the damage was done. We were being overwhelmed. They were closing in, their clicking sounds growing louder, a chorus of death. My human mind screamed from within the wolf's fury. Think! Don't just fight! My eyes darted around the clearing. 50 feet away, a pile of rusted mining equipment, old rails, a broken cart, lay half buried in the undergrowth. An idea, desperate and crazy, sparked in my brain. While the others held the line, I broke away from the fight. I grabbed a heavy rock, about the size of a bowling ball, in my powerful jaws. With a surge of adrenaline, I sprinted toward the junk pile and hurled the rock with all my might. The sound was deafening. The rock hit the pile of steel rails with a tremendous clang. That echoed through the entire ridge. It worked better than I could have imagined. Every single rothhoof in the clearing froze. Their skull heads snapped in the direction of the noise. The sound was so loud, so alien to them, that it completely overrode their senses. They abandoned the fight with us and scrambled, lurching and clawing over each other toward the source of the clang.
"Now!" I roared, the sound coming out as a guttural bark. "Get Caleb! Go!"
Owen, his muzzle stained with black ichor, hesitated for a second, then scooped up the whimpering Caleb by the scruff of his neck. Maya helped support the wounded Arthur, who was leaning heavily, a dark, viscous fluid oozing from the wound in his side. We retreated, melting back into the woods as the rothhooves swarmed the pile of rusted metal, tearing at it with their claws. Back in the relative safety of the ravine, the gravity of our defeat settled in. Caleb's wound was bad, but it was Arthur's that terrified them. Maya cleaned it as best she could, but the flesh around the puncture was already turning a bruised, sickly black. The pack's regeneration, their greatest gift, wasn't working. The poison on the rothhoof's claws was negating it. The mood in the barracks turned sour. The loss, combined with the Alpha's injury, had shattered their morale. Owen, his rage now fueled by fear and failure, rounded on me.
"This is your fault, city boy," he snarled, shoving me against the wall. "Your trick. We should have stayed and fought. We should have killed them all. You made us run like cowards." "We would all be dead if we'd stayed," I shot back, shoving him off me. "Better to die on your feet than run," he roared. Voices rose around the room, some defending me, others siding with Owen. The pack, already on the brink, was fracturing. The foundation of their world, their faith in their Alpha, was crumbling, and in its place, fear and anger were taking root. Arthur lay on his cot, feverish and silent, his labored breathing the only sound that could unite the room in a shared, terrifying dread. Arthur's decline was swift and terrible. The poison from the rothoof's claw was a corruption that even his formidable Alpha constitution couldn't fight. Within 2 days, the black necrosis had spread from the wound across his torso. A fever raged through him, leaving him lucid for only brief, pain-filled moments. The pack was rudderless, paralyzed by the impending death of their leader. Owen paced the barracks like a caged animal,
his anger a toxic cloud that poisoned the already fearful atmosphere. On the third night, Arthur's breathing grew shallow. He motioned for me to come closer, his voice a dry, rattling whisper. Maya tried to protest, to let him rest, but he waved her off. I knelt by his cot. The powerful, fearsome alpha was gone, replaced by a frail old man staring death in the face. "Listen to me," he rasped, his faded blue eyes locking onto mine. "Owen, he is strong, the strongest of us. But his heart is full of rage, not reason. He sees only the wolf. He forgets the man." He coughed, a racking sound that shook his entire body. "This curse, the wolf's strength, its fury, it is a tool, but it is not the answer. Your mind, the human mind that sees traps and tactics, that is the gift. That is what they have lost." He gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Do not let them die for their pride, Jake. Do not let his anger be their grave." He closed his eyes, and a final, shuddering breath escaped his lips. And then, he was still. A profound silence fell over the room. Arthur, the alpha of the Black Creek Pack for over 40 years, was dead. The chaos was immediate. The pack's sorrow curdled into panic. Before Arthur's body was even cold, Owen stepped into the center of the room.
"Arthur is gone," he bellowed, his voice leaving no room for grief. "His caution, his waiting, it got him killed. The rot hooves are at our door, and we have been hiding like rats. I say no more. I am Alpha now. Tonight, we take the fight to them. We will go to the mine, and we will slaughter them in their nest. We will avenge Arthur with blood."
A few of the younger, more aggressive wolves howled in agreement, caught up in his passionate rage. But I saw the terror in the eyes of the others, including Maya. A frontal assault on the mine, their home turf, was suicide. They would be walking into a meat grinder. Before I even knew what I was doing, I stepped forward. "No." The room went quiet. Owen turned to me, his eyes blazing with golden fury. "What did you say, outsider?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice steady, channeling Arthur's final words. "You're asking them to die." A head-on attack is what the Rothhooves expect. They hunt by sound. A full-scale battle will draw every last one of them. We'll be swarmed and torn to pieces in minutes. "So we should follow your plan?" Owen sneered. "Run and throw rocks?" "My plan saved 5 of us," I countered, my voice rising. "Yours would have left 5 corpses on that ridge. There's another way, a smarter way, using our heads, not just our claws." Owen took a step toward me, his fists clenched. "There's only one way to settle this. A challenge for Alpha." I looked at his powerful build, the raw fury radiating from him. In a physical fight, wolf or man, he would tear me apart, and we both knew it. The pack's survival depended on me stopping this madness, but I couldn't do it with brute force. I had to use the one weapon that was uniquely mine. "I won't fight you, Owen," I said calmly. "It would prove nothing except that one of us is better at tearing things apart. It won't save the pack, but I will challenge you." He looked confused. "What are you talking about?" "A different kind of trial," I proposed, my mind racing. "Give me 1 day. 1 cycle of the sun. You take your followers and hunt your way, with rage and force. I'll take those who will listen and hunt my way, with tactics and traps. We'll see who brings back more food for the pack. We'll see who kills more of our enemies. Let the pack judge which way is better. The path of the wolf, or the path of the man and the wolf combined." It was a gamble, an appeal to their desperate need for results. Owen, blinded by arrogance and confident in his own strength, laughed. "Fine. When you come back with nothing but squirrels, I will cast you out myself." The pack split, Owen took 4 of the strongest wolves with him, charging into the woods with bloodthirsty howls. Maya, the injured Caleb, and 2 other younger wolves, a brother and sister named Ben and Kira, stayed with me. They looked at me with a mixture of hope and doubt. I didn't waste a moment. I took them to the woods, but not to hunt elk. I had them gather materials, vines, sharp sticks, heavy rocks. I used my knowledge from my ghost tripper days, the survival skills I'd picked up for show, and applied them for real. We built snares on game trails. We dug a deep pit trap on a path we knew the Rothhooves used, covering it with branches. My most ambitious plan involved a narrow canyon. We spent hours rigging a deadfall, a massive log weighted with rocks, held in place by a single taut vine stretched across the canyon floor. Then we became the lure. We found a lone rothhoof, and instead of attacking, we made noise, snapping branches, throwing small stones, herding it, guiding it toward our trap. It worked. The blind creature, drawn by the sounds, stumbled right into our deadfall. The vine snapped, and the massive log crashed down, crushing it instantly. We reset the trap and did it again. By late afternoon, we had killed 3 Rothhooves without suffering a single scratch, and Ben and Kira had taken down a large deer in one of our snares. Owen's party returned just after sunset. They were empty-handed, covered in new wounds, and their numbers were reduced by 1. They had charged a herd of bison head-on and been brutally repulsed. The anger on Owen's face had curdled into humiliation. Then my group arrived. We dragged the deer behind us, and I threw the 3 grotesque deer skull heads of the Rothhooves we had killed onto the ground in the center of the barracks. A collective gasp went through the pack. We had brought back food, and we had slain the enemy, all without injury. The proof was undeniable. Owen stared at the skulls, then at me. His rage was gone, replaced by a stunned, grudging silence. The rest of the pack looked from him to me. They didn't need to say a word. The choice had been made. I hadn't challenged for the title of Alpha, but in that moment, standing over the trophies of a successful hunt born from strategy, not savagery, I had become their only hope. Leadership fell on my shoulders not with the weight of a crown, but with the cold, heavy burden of responsibility. The pack looked to me, their golden eyes filled with a desperate hope I wasn't sure I could fulfill. I wasn't Arthur, born to this life. I was an imposter, a man who just weeks ago was more concerned with YouTube analytics than survival. But Arthur's last words echoed in my mind. Your mind. That is the gift. I started there. I gathered the pack, not for a hunt, but for a lesson. I drew maps in the dirt with a stick, showing them choke points, ambush sites, lines of sight. I taught them concepts they had never considered: flanking maneuvers, strategic retreats, the use of terrain as a weapon. For generations they had fought as individuals, a collection of powerful predators. I had to teach them to fight as a unit, an army. My first order of business was reconnaissance. I spent half a day trekking back to my abandoned campsite, a strange archaeological dig into my own recent past. My cameras were smashed, my tent shredded, but my drone, tucked safely in its hardened case, was miraculously intact. I found my F-150 where I'd left it and managed to charge the drone's batteries using the truck's inverter. Back at the ravine, I sent the drone skyward. For the first time, we had an eye in the sky. I flew it over the mine, mapping the entrance and the surrounding area. The footage was chilling. The Rothhooves didn't just live in the mine, they had fortified it. They had dug pits and tunnels around the main entrance, creating a perimeter of death. But the drone revealed something else, something crucial. Deep within the heat signature feed, I saw a massive thermal anomaly in what must have been the mine's largest central chamber. It was huge, stationary, and radiated far more heat than the dozens of smaller signatures that moved around it. It was the heart of the nest. A queen, a matron, a source. Killing the drones one by one was pointless if this thing kept birthing more. With this new intelligence, a plan began to form. A desperate, audacious plan. We wouldn't attack the mine. We would make the mine attack us. I put the pack to work. We abandoned the ravine and moved into the ghost town of Black Creek itself. Under my direction, we transformed the main street, our enemy's future graveyard, into a massive kill box. We dragged rusted mining carts and heavy timbers to create narrow channels, funneling the enemy where we wanted them. We found a long-abandoned garage with several barrels of old fuel, gasoline and diesel, sloshing and potent. We rolled them into position at key points, ready to be ignited. We scavenged steel cables from a collapsed hoist and stretched them across alleys at ankle height, creating crude but effective tripwires. We were no longer just a pack of wolves. We were a unit of combat engineers. As we worked, I felt the change in myself solidifying. During the day, I was the human commander, Jake, drawing diagrams and explaining tactics. But as night fell, the wolf stirred within me. I was learning to ride the edge of the transformation, to draw on the beast's heightened senses, its strength, its boundless fury, without losing my human consciousness. I could let the golden glow bleed into my eyes, feel the surge of power in my muscles, and still think, still plan. The two halves of me, man and monster, were beginning to merge into something new, something more dangerous than either alone. The psychological toll was immense. I was becoming the very thing I used to mock. The leader of a pack of real-life monsters, fighting even more monstrous creatures. One evening, sitting by the fire, I found the battered remains of my professional camera in my pack. I turned it over in my hands, the cracked lens looking back at me like a dead eye. The man who had wielded this camera, the cynical, fame-hungry vlogger, felt like a complete stranger, a ghost from another life. The desire for subscribers and views had been replaced by a singular, all-consuming purpose: keeping these people, this strange, broken family, alive. A few nights before the full moon, when we knew our strength would be at its peak, I gathered the pack in the ruined saloon. They looked different now. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a grim determination. They were not just survivors anymore. They were soldiers. I laid out the final plan on a dusty poker table. "We won't win by fighting them in the dark on their terms," I said, my voice echoing in the empty hall. "We're going to draw them out, all of them. We'll make a noise so loud it will feel like the mountain is coming down on their heads. They will pour out of that mine in a frenzy, blind with rage, and they will run straight into our trap." I pointed to the map in the dirt. "Here, on this street, we will break them. We will use fire and traps and our fury to wipe out the swarm. And while the army is dying on the street, two of us," I looked directly at Maya, "will use the chaos to get inside the mine. We will cut off the head of the snake. We will kill their queen." Silence followed. It was a plan born of human cunning, to be executed with wolf's rage. It was an all-or-nothing gamble. It was our only chance. The full moon hung in the sky like a celestial spotlight, bathing the ghost town in an ethereal silver glow. The air was cold and still. The pack was in position, hidden on rooftops and in the shadowed doorways of the ruined buildings. Every sense was on a knife's edge. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a primal war drum. This was it. Phase 1 was mine. I climbed into the cab of my F-150, the dented door a grim souvenir of my first encounter, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a sacrilegious noise in the dead silence. I drove not away from the mine, but straight towards it, stopping the truck 100 yards from the gaping entrance. I took a deep breath, cranked the stereo as high as it would go, letting a blast of furious heavy metal scream from the speakers, and laid on the horn. Then I activated the truck's panic alarm. The resulting cacophony was apocalyptic. The blaring horn, the screeching alarm, and the distorted thunder of electric guitars slammed into the mountainside. It was an auditory assault designed to drive a sound-based creature insane. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low rumble emanated from the mine, a sound that grew into a wet, chittering roar. The ground began to vibrate. It was the sound of a nest being disturbed. They came not as a group, but as a flood. A black tide of lurching, twitching bodies poured from the mine entrance. The deer skull heads swiveled wildly, disoriented and enraged by the sonic attack. They surged forward, a river of nightmare fuel flowing directly towards the source of the noise, my truck. They moved with a single-minded purpose, ignoring everything else, funneling directly down the main street, directly into our kill box. "Now!" I yelled into the walkie-talkie I'd given Maya. On the rooftops, the wolves with torches lit the rags stuffed into bottles of fuel and hurled them down. The Molotovs shattered on the street, and the old gasoline ignited with a deafening whoosh. A wall of fire erupted at the far end of the street, cutting off the Rothhoof's only path of retreat. The front of the wave, blinded by the sudden light and heat, recoiled in confusion, piling into the ranks behind them. The entire horde was now trapped in our gauntlet. Then we hit them. The pack descended from the shadows. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter. We had the high ground, the element of surprise, and a coordinated plan. Wolves leaped from rooftops onto the writhing mass below. We struck from alleys, severing limbs and shattering skulls, then melted back into the darkness before the others could react to the sound. The steel cables we'd strung up did their job, sending the mindless creatures tumbling to the ground where they were dispatched with brutal efficiency. I fought alongside them, the transformation a seamless flow of power. The rage of the wolf was a fire in my blood, but my mind was cold, clear, and calculating, directing the flow of the battle, spotting weaknesses, calling out targets. In the heart of the chaos, I saw Owen. He fought not with his old, blind rage, but with a focused, deadly purpose. He saw the effectiveness of the plan, the symphony of destruction I had orchestrated. At one critical moment, a small group of Rothhoofs broke through our line, threatening to flank Maya as she prepared to make her move. Owen saw it. Without hesitation, he threw himself in their path, a dark, furred whirlwind of claws and fangs. He took down 2 of them before the third impaled him on its bony claws. He went down, but he bought her the second she needed. His last act was a look in my direction, a look of fierce, bloody, hard-won respect. He had redeemed himself.
"Jake, now!"
Maya's voice crackled over the radio.
"The entrance is clear."
While the pack continued to decimate the trapped horde, Maya and I broke off, sprinting toward the now unguarded mine entrance. We plunged into the darkness, the sounds of the battle fading behind us, replaced by the damp, foul-smelling stillness of the earth. We moved quickly through the tunnels, following the rising heat and the sickeningly sweet smell of the nest. We found it in a vast central cavern, the Queen. It was a pulsating, obscene mountain of gray flesh, dozens of yards across, fused directly to the rock of the cavern walls and floor. It was a living womb of horrors. Several deer skulls were embedded in its bloated body, twitching uselessly. We could see new rot hooves gestating within translucent sacs on its surface, being birthed from its foulness. It was the source of the entire infestation. As we entered, the queen sensed us. A psychic shriek, silent but deafening, echoed in our minds. The ground trembled as it shifted its immense bulk. This wasn't a fight for claws. This was a demolition job. While Maya drew its attention, her silver-furred form a darting distraction, I sprinted along the cavern wall. I knew from the old mine maps that this area was riddled with support beams. I also knew from my initial scouting that the miners had left behind caches of dynamite, deemed too unstable to move. I found what I was looking for. A dozen sticks of sweating, volatile dynamite tucked into an old crate. Working frantically, I jammed the explosives into crevices in the rock and around the key support beams directly above the queen. I ripped a piece of my shirt, doused it in lantern oil from a nearby sconce, and created a makeshift fuse.
"Maya, get out!"
I roared. I lit the fuse. It sputtered to life. As Maya scrambled out of the cavern, I followed, not daring to look back. We were halfway down the main tunnel when the world behind us disintegrated. A deep, thunderous boom shook the entire mountain. The tunnel behind us collapsed in a storm of rock and dust. We stumbled out into the moonlight. On the street, the battle had stopped. The remaining rot hooves, dozens of them, had frozen in place. As we watched, they began to twitch and convulse, then fell to the ground like puppets with their strings cut. The death of their queen had severed the connection. The hive mind was broken. The battle for Black Creek was over. We had won. Dawn broke over a scene of utter devastation. The main street of Black Creek was a charnel house, littered with the bizarre broken bodies of the rot hooves and slick with their black ichor. The rising sun cast long shadows, making the town look more like a battlefield than a home. The surviving members of the pack, fewer than when we started, but alive, gathered in the center of the street. They were exhausted, wounded, but their eyes held a light I had never seen before. Victory. They gathered around me. One by one, they lowered their heads in a gesture of silent, instinctual fealty. There was no ceremony, no proclamation. There didn't need to be. Owen's sacrifice had sealed it. The victory had cemented it. I felt no triumph, no surge of pride, only the immense, crushing weight of their survival on my shoulders. I looked at my hands, human hands again, but caked with dirt and gore. The hands of a strategist, a killer, and now a king. Later that day, I found my broken camera lying in the dirt near where the final stand had taken place. I picked it up. The plastic shell cracked, the lens shattered. I stared into its dead eye, remembering the man I had been just weeks ago. The cynical performer hunting for ghosts he never believed in. Jake Carter, the ghost tripper. He was a phantom, a hollow man I barely recognized. He had chased shadows for a living. I had fought nightmares to survive. Without ceremony, without a second thought, I tossed the camera into one of the smoldering fires we had set. The plastic warped and melted, my old life turning to smoke and ash. I knelt by a puddle of rainwater collected in a wagon rut and stared at my reflection. My face was mine, thinner, harder, etched with lines that hadn't been there before. But the eyes were different. They were no longer just brown. In their depths, a permanent golden light now swirled, a feral gleam that would never fade. The wolf was no longer a visitor that came with the moon. It was a part of me now, forever looking out through my eyes. Jake Carter, the YouTuber, was dead. In his place stood the Lord of Black Creek. Maya came and stood beside me. She didn't speak, just placed a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of affection or romance, but something deeper, more solid. It was the quiet acknowledgement of a soldier to her commander, of a pack mate to her alpha. These people, this small, battered clan of werewolves, were my family now. Their survival was my purpose. I looked up past the shattered town to the mountains that ringed our valley. I saw the dark, sealed entrance to the mine, the deep green of the endless forest. This place was no longer a spooky destination for a video. It was not a curse. It was my domain, my fiefdom. It was my duty to hold it, to protect it, to rebuild. As the sun began to set, casting the peaks in long, sharp shadows, I climbed to the highest point of the bluff overlooking the town. I stood on the precipice, the wind whipping through my hair, and looked down at my kingdom of ruin and rebirth. I tilted my head back to the darkening sky and let out a howl. It wasn't the scream of a man in torment or the cry of a mindless beast. It was a declaration. It was the sound of ownership, of authority, of a king claiming his throne. The sound rolled across the valley, echoing off the stone faces of the mountains. And from the town below, from the woods, from the shadows, a chorus of howls answered me. My pack, my family, my subjects. The war was over. The rain had just begun.